more in the 18th century than we do the 21st. So we started to replicate what a homestead would have been like 250 to 300 years ago, and it's grown from that to a fort.
The thing that really caught me was when you were talking about in one of your videos about your tools, and you were talking about the craftsmanship that made the tools, and the person and how these original tools still last, and that the person making them back then would have known that and would have been probably wanting their descendants to be using this tool 200 years later. So,
indeed, sir. If we think about a modern era, how things don't last, versus the stuff they made then, they did build it to last. Mind you, it was simpler, it wasn't mechanized. But yeah, the person that was hammering that spoke shade out on the anvil, he knew it was going to be used 200 or 300 years later.
Embark on a journey of discovery into the heart of North American family stories. Welcome to the How We Got Here podcast, where family historian Brian Nash connects with guests to explore the often untold and always fascinating histories of their ancestors. Prepare to be moved, surprised, and deeply connected by these personal accounts. And remember, every family has a story to tell, and every story is worth exploring. In this episode, Brian sits down with Peter Kelly, the driving force behind the Woodland Escape, a YouTube channel devoted to bringing 18th century homesteading and living archaeology to life. From hand-forging nails on an open hearth to building birch-bark canoes and authentic blockhouses, Peter and his team have spent the last 4.5 years recreating every aspect of early Canadian frontier life on their Kelly's Station site, nestled midway between Toronto and Ottawa. You'll hear how Peter's fascination with period craftsmanship, from tanning leather by brain tanning it over coals to casting lead musket balls in historic molds, evolved into a community refuge for living historians, complete with education days for local students. We also dive into the personal side of his work, tracing his own family's journey from 19th century Ireland to Northern Ontario, the wild tales of logging camp kitchens and Revolutionary-era Quaker youths sent on horseback to negotiate land deals, and why those rich narratives matter just as much as names and dates on a family tree. Together, we explore what living history can teach us about our ancestors' values of community, self-reliance, and storytelling, and how unearthing those stories can deepen our own appreciation for where we came from. Whether you're a seasoned genealogist or just beginning to wonder about your roots, Peter's experiences remind us that the memories we preserve today will become tomorrow's family legends. So sit back and grab your favorite beverage, perhaps a glass of Canadian rye whiskey for sipping. Unless, of course, you're listening to this while you're driving, then you better stick to coffee.
Okay, today on my podcast I have a guest. His name is Peter Kelly. He's from the a YouTube page called the Woodland Escape. Why don't you just tell us a little bit about it and what you do, Peter? Because I find it very fascinating.
Okay. We started it about 4.5 years ago, and essentially it's skills of the 18th century. And I might probably live more in the 18th century than we do the 21st. So we started to replicate what a homestead would have been like 250 to 300 years ago, and it's grown from that to a fort.
Oh, that's cool. Okay, I didn't know that. I guess I haven't watched all the videos. I started right from the beginning, and I just found it so fascinating, just the way you started. So I didn't realize it built up to a fort.
Well, typically in the 18th century, about every 10 to 15 miles, a homesteader would actually fortify their homestead, and it was a place that outlying homesteaders could make their way during turbulent times, native uprisings, or military campaigns, etc. So we've built Kelly's Station.
Okay. Now, it's the 18th century, as I understand it looks like it's specifically the period you're trying to portray would be the lowest period of what would have been Upper Canada, I guess, at the time, if they call it that by that point.
Actually, it would predate the Loyalist standing. Yeah, it actually predates that. Yeah, I guess the impetus to doing it is I've always been fascinated how they did things prior to the Industrial Revolution, which historians arguably will agree that it was around 1750. So our time frame or persona would be sort of between 1700s to 1750, but we have, over the 4.5 years, started to explore into the Loyalist time. We fast forwarded. That sounds ironic, but fast forward to the Loyalists, American Civil War, War of 1812, and then, of course, the time period we're in would be the French and Indian War time period.
Oh, that's definitely interesting. The whole aspect. One of the things I got from watching, well, right from the beginning, where you made your own nails. I've seen people where they've gone and they've done these type of things before, but they don't take it that deep to the fact you made your own nails. And so Ray, a thing that really caught me was when you were talking about one of your videos about your tools, and you were talking about the craftsmanship that made the tools, and the person and how these original tools still last, and that the person making them back then would have known that, and would have been probably wanting their descendants to be using this tool 200 years later. So,
indeed, sir. If we think about our modern era, how things don't last, versus the stuff they made then, they did build it to last. Mind you, it was simpler, it wasn't mechanized. But yeah, the person that was hammering that spoke shave out on the anvil, he knew it was going to be used 200 or 300 years later. What he didn't know is they weren't going to be needed unless it was a place like Kelly Station, because most of those tools have fallen out of favor, I guess, for mechanization.
I mean, I'm sure there's still things that are very basic that are still used, and a person today would recognize them. But yeah, great that because things are so mass produced here now, even if that person from back then would recognize it, they would be probably very, very judging about the lack of craftsmanship, or actually the handmaidenness of it, I guess. With the pyramid, well, were you interested first in the building aspect, or were you drawn to the history and then the building came out of it?
No, I think history would have come first, Brian, and then from that, I wanted to do more hands-on. As I mentioned, I wanted to figure out how they did things. Like, how did they? I mean, they just didn't survive; they thrived in that era. Much harder life, of course, much slower pace to things. But I wanted to get my hands on those tools and see what I could reproduce, and that evolved into we've built birch-bark canoes. We brain tan leather the way it was done in that time period. We have a working 18th century blacksmith shop in the fortification. So just a real keen desire to figure out how did they do it, and it's been quite a satisfying journey.
Okay, and do you know your own family's background? You're in Ontario. Has your family always were they originally settled there, or they?
Indeed. So four of my grandparents immigrated from Ireland in the mid to late 1800s. And my grandpa Hammond, on my mother's side, he was a cook. It came from Ireland, and when he arrived here, he made his way north to Mattawa, which the railroad tracks went that far, and they pushed him as far as North Bay, which we think of in today's terms, we think of it as a fairly good-sized city in central to northern Ontario. But at the time, it was simply a depot. It was the north bay of Lake Nipissing. So they were pushing the railroad tracks north from there. There were no roads, of course. And somebody in the wintertime, he would cook for the logging camps. In the summertime, he was a cook in the railroad camps. And he had quite a few stories to tell from those days.
Well, I can imagine it would be a fascinating. It's funny when you for being a genealogist, I was studying families. It doesn't take that many generations to you have first-hand accounts that can go back to that period. The railroad building in Ontario was still going on. Was part of the early 20th century even. So you're even predating your ancestors in your experience, your recreation.
Almost 200 years. He did cook. One story he told me, one winter he cooked in a logging camp that had over 400 loggers in it. I can't imagine what it would be like to try to fill the bellies of those men, but he had people that, chop the potatoes and the carrots and see, I guess he decided what went into the pot, but somebody had bought a kerosene can in from outside and set it on a wood stove, and I don't know whether he was a new hire or not, or apprentice, let's say, and it had been the roof off the cook shed, but according to my grandpa, nobody was in it at the time, so he had a million stories like that.
So when you're doing this, you want to call it a recreation or a reenactment? I don't know what term would be best, but they're doing more than just reenacting it. It seems like you're living it.
Yeah, we probably spend 80% of my time in period clothes doing period things, and maybe 20% or so in modern clothes. So yeah, we're essentially live 18th century, and I'm quite enjoying the time period. It's a much slower pace, sir.
And much easier. They see. I think people that have it harder, but you're right. They seem to strive, and they just, I think, endured the hardship. I mean, I can't imagine myself and my generation. I'm in my 50s, even thinking that of living that life, and knowing that there was, not knowing necessarily that what we'd have now is the conveniences that I go to, but actually worrying about that as a day-to-day thing, and knowing that's probably what I have to do for the long run, and hopefully things will get better. But yeah, it's funny, there's so much joy that those, I know from reading accounts of our ancestors and stuff, that they had in times that you would think would be taken aback for us nowadays.
Well, they didn't know anything else, right? I mean, they were living with the latest and greatest technology in the time. So, as I mentioned, it was certainly hard work, but I don't think they thought of it that way. That was just what they had to do to survive. Simple things like heating your homes, which we turn a thermostat up on a wall. Well, they had to cut and split that firewood for a winter, and that would take up a good third of their year. Particularly the time frame we portray, because it was during what they called the mini ice age. So it was about 60 years in there where winters were a lot colder, snow was a lot deeper. So yes, things as simple as just keeping your house warm. And they had to burn firewood year round. I mean, if you wanted to heat something up, you lit a fire. So, yeah. that would be just a small part of their day-to-day activity. I don't think they looked at it as hard. As I say, they just, it's what they had to do to get by. Yeah.
If they didn't notice the convenience of a microwave being able to heat something up in half a minute, they probably didn't mind spending the time to get the fire to be able to enjoy it.
Right, like we heat your coffee. I'm on the other side. My grandma Kelly, she lived to be 3 months short of 100, and she was born shortly after the American Civil War, 1872. And I mean, if I look at what she saw when we're talking about progress, so she lived before electricity. She saw the telephone, the radio, the television. She saw man's first flight. She lived long enough to see man land on the moon. Also, great storyteller, my grandma Kelly was. Yeah, so it's interesting because we're kind of looking at how that evolution of technology made their life easy. One of the tales she told me that really fascinated me, she remembers as a young child going to a public canyon in London, Ontario. And they didn't go to town specifically to see the hanging, but it was their monthly run with their horse and buggy to pick up supplies, and there happened to be a hanging that day. So stories like that kind of got me fascinated with history.
Yeah, that's one of my fascinations is from having heard my great-grandparents and my grandparents' stories of different times. And what do you think your grandma would think that she saw all that progress, but then you've decided to revert and go backwards as far as forwards?
I never thought of that. That's a great question. Yeah, I'm going the opposite way. She was great. I'm sure she was quite happy when they got a telephone or some form of heat that requires putting word. Yeah, it wasn't. Never. But then it's with her someday. That's not really thing.
Now, do you find? And for your research, and it's got to be hard because the people you interact with aren't necessarily in that period or in that period mindset even. What's the hardest thing that people, when you're talking to them, they have a real hard time wrapping their mind around that you would actually, why, like, you have to do this and you really want to do that? Like, what do you think that most people today, I know what I would think would be a couple of the hardest things, but the reactions you sort of get when you talk to people,
Some are pretty bizarre. I have a friend that's a Navajo historian that, I can give you an example. He was finding the threads in a screw one day, and his neighbor dropped by and he says, "What are you doing, Bob?" He says, "Well, I'm making a screw, isn't it obvious?" And you said, "You go down to the store and buy them by the gross." So, it's strange to figure out how they did things, and then applying that, and then doing something that you can use, like a treadle lathe or a flint on a gun. Like, I'm an avid gun maker, but the technology I'm employing is 300-year-old technology, flintlock type firearms. Back to Grandma's question, that's giving me that's tickling the kink here. What you think? With me going the other way.
Yeah. It would just be, it's, I often think of just to even, I think that people tend to think what would their grandparents think of, like, the things we have now, new technology, but thinking the regression. I'm sure part of it probably would, if she could see what people deal with today, she'd probably like, yeah, you're probably better going back.
You're talking about, I have a story that's rather long. I don't know if we have time to cover it, but we were talking about genealogy and people sort of Europe there. So there was a family in Lancaster, Pennsylvania called Reeser, and they're Quakers. So the boardrooms were beating leading up to the Revolutionary War. And they may not thought very highly of their Sons of Liberty neighbors who they all wanted to do was be left alone and be neutral, but it wasn't always an option. So the father racer puts his 12-year-old son on his best stallion and flew into Canada to see if he can purchase land. And there were horse breeders of renown. So and I'm trying to visualize my 12-year-old children doing this. I can't wrap my head around that. But this 12-year-old kid gets on the horse. It takes him 4.5 weeks to ride from Winchester, Pennsylvania to York, where he talks to some people to see if there's land available. They put him in contact with a colonel that was retired from the French and Indian Wars and had been granted land by the king. So it's 600 acres in the Rouge Valley for sale on a river, complete with water rights, which one had to have at that time. So we can trade in the horse for the 600 acres. And they go back to York, they get a solicitor, they drop the deed, they come out of the office, and the kid starts taking the saddle and the bridle off the horse. This questionable career starts to complain, and he says, "Oh, I sold you the horse, didn't sell you the saddle and the bridle." So he sells then to get some money. The sleigh breaks down somewhat. We don't know how long it takes him to get back to Pennsylvania because he has to do that on foot. And the Reeser family gathered all their extended family. I think there were 7 wagons in total. They make their way to Canada. They settle in the Rouge Valley near the modern-day Toronto Zoo. And they started Reeser's Quarter, which still exists today. It's just a crossroads, but they built mills and schools and grist mills and sawmills, etc. I think that a fascinating story. It kind of predates your lore of stuff, but from a genealogy point of view, I find it pretty interesting.
So there's just the fact, like you said, you can't imagine something with a 12-year-old to do that. I know it's probably one of the things that's, and I mean, I'm not the only one, I'm sure, who says it's wrong with our generations. We don't expect a lot of our younger people. Like, I don't think people, I think a lot of people would have problems sending their 20-year-old son to do that nowadays, let alone a 12-year-old, thinking that to go to another country by themselves, having to figure out how to get there, and then actually carry out a negotiation with a Carl, somebody of some stature.
Cool was the description.
Yeah.
You know, I find genealogy fascinating. You know, it's always fun and interesting to figure out where we came from. To, you know, we go back and we go, our great grandfather was born here in the States and then moved here. That's always fascinating, but often is lacking in genealogy is the stories. Like that particular story came from a family that kept their records. They kept their records for centuries, and but that's rarely done because that sure adds an element to the whole genealogy experience.
I think definitely. That's one of the things I try to do. Is I try to encourage people to find the stories of their families. It's more than just the dates and the places. It's even if you sometimes can't find the specific stories, you can find out what was going on, where they were at that time, and understand the things that they would have experienced in their life if you can't find a personal account. But there's not a lot of families that have kept that good written history. I think there was probably up to my grandparents' generation, there had been good oral history that had been maintained for generations that seemed to have gotten lost somewhere. I don't know if it's when we started, mixing cultures, and I mean that to say, like, it used to be you were Scottish, you went to a Scottish community, you probably married a Scot, you probably, you worked for a Scot, and etc. with the different communities. but I think you kept your stories, your family stories, because they were also the stories of the community, and I think it was just, I think almost when we got more literate and everybody could read and write, we didn't bother writing down the things that were most important.
Some families, that were literate actually wrote books, and you could really follow the family stories as well as the genealogy. I spent last weekend at Ameliasburg on Prince Edward County. Okay. I think those are like the fifth town built by the Laras, and they have a genealogy office there. It's all volunteers, but it was fascinating. Two of the women who volunteered there did presentations, first-person presentations, portraying the ancestors. That was just this past weekend, and I found it quite fascinating. Yeah, one of them had actually, her great-great-great-grandfather had written a book, so she knew every story, every detail of her family history. Absolutely amazing.
That's awesome. It's a treasure that when people have that, and they need to definitely treasure it. So you've talked about some other people. You talked about a friend making screws now, and I noticed on your videos you have people that come in with different expertise. Now, if you were the person in that time period, would you have relied on the expertise of these other people's as much, or were people, do you think, more generalists? And at the time, you would have known how to do everything, not necessarily everything well, but you would have known how to manage to do everything.
So well, in our research, most of them were kind of jacks of all trade, but then they would lack certain resources. So they could do basic blacksmithing on a fire. They could cast lead balls for their muskets in the fire. They could make nails. It was like a cottage industry at an open fire in the fireplace. But never was it true live where currency was almost non-existent. So the barter system was the way to go. And if you, for example, had a blacksmith shop and you needed more sophisticated things than you could do, you would barter what you could do. I think they had, to some degree, levels of expertise in various things, which they would, as I point out, trade with people that had something they didn't have.
Yep. And how large is the community that is involved with you in this? And by the community, I mean just the people that you interact that are also wanting to experience this type of lifestyle. Maybe not as you and your wife are, but just in part. Is it a large community around you that?
No, it's fairly small in Canada and very large in the Americas. Yeah. I just returned from Virginia, from Martin Station, and there were a few thousand there. I did work with other researchers because that's a passion. So when I'm not in period clothes and I'm sitting with an electronic device like I'm holding in my hand here, I research. And we collaborate with each other. We're constantly looking for first-person accounts that we can verify thesis we have, or theories we have, I should say, of certain things. So we're a fairly active group of historic researchers for the time period that I do. Some of them have podcasts like yourself. I have other YouTube content creators that focus on the same time period. Yeah, so it's some people do a lot more, and they're the heavy lifters, and I get to represent it, so it all works out. But in Canada, it seems that there's not the same extent of interest that there might be in the Americas for history.
Yeah, I know that even a lot of the military reenactment is a very big thing in the States. That you have a lot of people participate, not just the soldiers, but their families, because that's the way military were a lot of times. the families would be possibly hangers on, helping to make the provisions for the troops, because they were they were from communities or their regiments or battalions or whatever. So you had people that you want to participate in that, and you had a friend that whose family was they were here in Canada, but they would go to a lot of things in the States, and there was one they were telling me about. They went and basically did a wagon train for like 10 weeks. She said when she was a kid, her parents dragged her to this. She didn't appreciate it at the time, but she said, as an adult, she got to really appreciate it more. What can we do to get the young people interested in history? Like, that's one of the reasons I want people to be interested in genealogy, because I find when you start getting interested in genealogy, it's personal, right? It's your family, it's your grandfather, your grandmother, your great-grandmother. So you get interested in that, and I'm hoping by talking about it and encouraging people to find the stories of their family, it encourages them to explore history in general, to find out what was actually going on at the time when these people lived. What would be the thing that you think that we can do to encourage young people? I think it's great. There's a lot of content on YouTube, which is great, and I think young people seem to watch it somewhat. But what things do you think that they can do? Because it's really important to me. It's important we don't lose our history, because I'm a very strong proponent of the belief that those who forget history are bound to repeat it. And with all the good we did, there was a lot of mistakes made along the way, and hopefully we can learn from those mistakes and improve upon them. Something, and in some ways even go back, because the values, I think, of in the pioneer in this times, and that your values of your neighbors and your community was so much more important. You knew who your neighbors were, and you were willing to pitch in and lend a hand if they needed. If there was something going on in the family, if there was a woman became a widow, the community would rally around her and help her survive into that period until, and then also help her find hopefully a new husband if she had young children, a lot of times to help continue to raise the family. And I think it's lost that a sense of what that can do for a person, for an individual. So I guess, my main question is, what do you think we really need to, and what are you trying to do to turn, through what you're doing, to try to encourage people to get in touch with history and art history and history in general?
Oh, I totally support getting young people involved, because if we don't, I don't call it a hobby, it's more living it. For me, it's living archaeology versus reenactment.
That's the discussion, yeah.
I built this whole complex, and it's been a 4.5 continuous year project to become a refuge for living historians. So a place where they can come and showcase their skills, be it core work or gun making or leather work or snowshoe building. But recently we had a scout troop come out. They all went into blacksmith and made a peg, which they had to draw out and point and bend. And then we put up an 18-foot diameter teepee, and then the second night they all slept in it. The whole company, or troop, I guess, slept in it. I also do as many education days as I can. So at historically enactments, often Friday, Saturday, Sunday, and then the Friday, we, at least in Ontario, they'll bus in grade 7 mates, and we set up stations. So I may set up a birch-bark canoe building station, and we'll talk about the history and how they're built. And I have 50 kids for 15 minutes. The bell rings, and we get another 50. We do that all day long. So we're trying to expose them. If we can do hands-on, they could do with the scope troop, that's even better. And I would personally believe there's a subtle growth in interest of young people, which is encouraging.
Yeah, I see when notice that too, that there is that reigniting of an interest in history. I think, I hopefully it's a good thing, and that means the young people are really intent on finding out about the past. So how does a person contact you, or if they want to go and see what you did to in person? So first, where in Ontario exactly are you now? Like, how does one go about, and can they interact with you?
But they can go to the Woodland Escape. There's an email contact there. We live in Eastern Ontario. Our Kelly station is located about halfway. If you drew a straight line between Toronto and Ottawa, we're about halfway between. Wouldn't open to the public per se, but if people contact us and have an interest in history or would like to visit the fort, we're certainly open to that. I continue to do things. If a school asks me to do a presentation, I do it. So, and this is all volunteer. We're not in this to make money. We're into it to try to encourage people to develop an interest in history.
Speaking of this, of course, I know you. Like you said, you're not in to make money, but there is an expense that definitely goes through it. So I'm sure you're very happy if somebody wants to contribute, or when you come out of the 18th century and you come back into the 21st century, what's the thing you look forward to most coming to the 21st century, so to speak?
Getting back in the 18th century.
You look forward to going back?
Yeah. Like I'm sitting there until I had to come to town so I'd have a reception, but I'm sitting here dressed in 300 euro fashion. And I go into the store. I went into a store, modern clothes in my small town, the Woodland Escape. So I just love being in it. And if I don't, I don't just go back to the fort to work. I go back there to immerse myself in that time period. And the only way I can do that is if I'm in the clothing, the footwear, carrying the accoutrements they would have had. If you watch some of the videos, you'll notice them pretty much always have a flintlock in my hand because they did. It was either in hand or close at hand because they were. The 1700s are probably the most turbulent century in the North American continent. Yeah. So it's often that gun isn't even loaded, but I'm trying to live the moment, and by having the props, some would call them props, but by having them do it the way they did, it immerses me into the time period.
Yeah, no, definitely. I wouldn't call them props either. They're the utensils, they're tools, right? That would protect them from other humans, but also I'm sure wildlife or as well, that they would have to be wary of
to feed themselves, for sure. Big component of it.
Now, do you do that? Do you get most of your food from hunting?
We do. We grow our own food. We preserve our own foods. We build all our clothes, our footwear, our firearms. We do our leather work. So we don't. Grocery bill is pretty small. Whoever roots out we do preserve modern ways. We can, which they wouldn't have had in that time period. But our larder's full. Our root cellar's still got ample food in it, and the garden's growing in as we speak.
And how did your wife take to this? How did that conversation go? Was it something you guys kind of always talked about doing, or one day out of the blue you said, honey, I think I'd like to move back to 1720?
Yeah, right. Bit of a shock. She or her children, we take them to reenactments. And if the passion grew from not wanting to reenact it, but actually live it, like living archaeology, experiential archaeology, lots of fancy names, but the road just evolved. It wasn't like I had to persuade her. I probably do a lot more than her. I go to a lot more of this. Like she hunts with modern fires, I hunt with 300-year-old flintlock technology. She fishes in the modern fishing pole. I fish with barber hooks that I forge in the blacksmith shop. So
Who catches more fish?
Well, she does. But I get to eat them, so
that's true. And bet you if you went to the doctor, you probably your lifestyle is a lot healthier. As far as the food you eat, without all the preservatives and all this extra stuff that we have thrown in nowadays that we can't even decipher what's in it. You're eating something you probably this is whatever we shot or whatever we fished.
No, we don't eat. We don't eat. What do they call it? Processed food. Yeah. Very, very little. Yeah. Yeah. 2 years pull, I'm still on the right side of the grass and no aches or pain, so something must be working.
And even the ground, I know that's one of the things, because my wife suffers issues with eating a lot of modern grains that would just, that's, she's done a lot of research on it and how that's actually, it hurts people, the things that were meant to be progress and helpful for growing, it just caused so much, many problems that we hadn't experienced in previous generations because of the processing of our food. My wife is big on we grow as much as we can as far as vegetables. That meant much hunting is not a lot to do on PEI. We don't have any large game.
You don't have any large game?
No. The social hares are about the largest natural predator a person might eat here, and geese, or natural, not predator, but natural wildlife that a person would hunt.
But you have lots of fish, sir.
Lots of fish, and a lot of good fish. So, okay, that's been a pleasure talking to you, Peter. I really enjoyed this. People want to get watching your channel and on YouTube, or they just go to the Woodland Escape.
If they go to the YouTube, and I know a movie on YouTube, a lot of people don't even know, but if you click on the description, which down below the video, there's our contact information on there. I'm on Facebook. The best way is contact me via the Woodland Escape email. We don't put our phone number on there, but we get back to everyone.
Okay, well, great. It was great talking to you. Hopefully, I might be able to check in with you some other times. What projects do you have going in this summer?
We're building a beehive oven is the next project. Well, not next, second next. We're finishing a 2-story blockhouse, so that's all that'll be chinked, and bunk beds in the bottom and hammocks in the top. It'll sleep 10 when it's done. And we're going to do the second root settle, which will be inside the palisade wall. So I'm not going to run out of work, Brian.
Well, that's good. That's good.
Hey, mate. It's been a pleasure, Brian.
It's been a pleasure talking to you, Peter. Thank you.
You have yourself a good day.
That brings us to the end of another episode of the How We Got Here podcast. Thank you so much for joining us. Brian loves hearing from you, so please feel free to leave a comment below. If you have a burning genealogy question or a fantastic idea for a future episode, send an email to podcast@howwegothere.ca. And don't forget to check out our new genealogy community at https://familycircle.howwegothere.ca.